Hello folks, my name's Hypocrisite and welcome to another episode of Samara in TNO. In the previous episode we've managed to get to the focus take what is there, which was the Zykov's proposition of austerity, and we will go with the next one, Scavenge for vehicles. Zykov might have convinced the rest of the officer corps and factions not to increase supply requisition on the people or supply demands to the Germans, but there is still a shortage of almost everything. The most pressing concern is our ever-dwindling pool of motorized vehicles. Without much native industry and with limited import capacities, our trucks and armored vehicles fleet melt day by day. Our men have been sent to scour the countryside for anything that might roll downhill. Tractors that peasants have given up on, military cars and trucks that have been abandoned in the woods probably. Whatever broken down German or Soviet tank hidden in the marshes or forests. This iron harvest will be a meager one, and most of what we find will likely be useless. But any quantity of engine blocks and armor plate we can scrounge up will be useful for the cause. And I think that it is a good idea to buy some equipment from Zlatoust. And I think that infantry equipment is the most pressing concern. Of course, they may... that doesn't concern us. They may not send us the stuff that we asked for. But they actually have sent it. Men shouted in the distance, retreating from the patch of trees and shrubbery handpicked by Colonel Oktan. That early morning, the few stars peeking through the rising sun's glare alongside the gentle falling snowflakes were not strong enough to pierce beauty through the grisly sight of a blood-stained forest, as cloudly mists of Russian blood sprayed through the leaves. There, deep within the Russian wilderness, Colonel Oktan found himself alive, his men alive, and every single would-be marauder of his fine homestead and village on the run, or lying dead in the snow. Everyone stood silent, talking in their first victory in months, their first chance to make a stand against the Russian attacker who so greatly pillaged their lands for so long. The men threw down their rifles, hugged one another, and cheered to the heavens over their newfound victory against the murderous thieves who plagued them for so long. Colonel Oktan, however, took a minute to inspect the bodies, boys, the least of which must have been 16. A prime age for cadets before the rise of the Soviets, perhaps, but the cold, lifeless eyes reminded him of that day when Russia would war no longer. Cheers and cries greeted the party of guards as they entered their settlement once again, this time having tasted their first victory against the men who tore their land asunder for so long. However, whilst the rest of the men enjoyed family in the taverns, Colonel Oktan made his way up to the office, readying himself to congratulate the men truly in charge of their victory. Spinning the rotary, Colonel Oktan awaited. Yes, Mayor Consul Dragunov, this is Colonel Oktan. I wish to report the lives you saved with your most recent transaction with our government. Excellent. So we actually have bought... I can see it. Probably something like 500? Oh, actually we are on the plus. That's good. Okay, so we've scavenged for vehicles and now we'll be looking for treasure. The decline of our vehicle fleet arrested somewhat, but our soldiers are moving their efforts to whatever else can be lifted and carted off to our bases. Forgotten German or Soviet supply caches, farms abandoned by fleeing or dead peasants, downed German planes, buried Tsarist gold. The pile of junk brought back to the bases are sifted through by the men. Whatever we can use is stashed away. Among the rest, whatever has a monetary value is added to convoys headed for the Moscovian border, where black market traders will give us a fraction of the price for the object. Selling abandoned cuckoo clocks and teapots will not make us rich men, but anything we can trade on the black market for supplies will still prove invaluable. To cheer up the soldiers, 15% of every discovery is given to the men directly to encourage them to search. Of course, any soldier that steals from civilians to increase his stash shall be shot. The idea is to avoid angering them further, not to use them to pad our retirement funds. So we will get some more infantry equipment. I have no idea what a rainbow is. I have no idea. Okay, so the search for treasure has ended, and we'll be dealing with the scent. It has not escaped Vlasov and the KONR leadership's attention that our army of national liberation is widely unpopular even among the members of our nation that we have already liberated. Ignoring for the moment issues of taxation we may or may not have exacerbated, the people of Samara disdain us as foreign stooges. Many citizens, especially among the left-leaning, see us as unrepentant traitors. Unrepentant traitors that have contributed to the failure of the WRRF. Opinion among the officer corps as to the best solution ran the usual gamut of proposals. It would thus be for the best to convoke another meeting of the General Staff to discuss the issue and perhaps settle on one strategy to secure the goodwill of the people, or at least the absence of their opposition. On discontent and popular support, the assembled officers and Ouch! I've bit my tongue. Fuck. Okay, so let's try again. The assembled officers and soldiers fell silent as Marshal Vlasov walked to the podium. The old man still commanded, if not universal respect, then grim curiosity from the officers' corps. Friends of the National Liberation Army and of KONR, ever since your valiant efforts have freed the land around Samara, opponents to our liberation efforts have perpetually tried to undermine our rule. Their attempts to spread discontentment has not been helped by the endless bombing campaign and the frequent economic problems imposed on the Russian people by the anarchy. As the time to renew our efforts to free Russia approach, this opposition cannot be tolerated. The brave men of the ROA cannot march to war as a fifth column of terrorists and communist anarchists spread chaos at home. On one way or the other, respect of our administration and a healthy fear of breaking the law must be spread throughout our land. I have convened you to this meeting so that proposed solutions might be discussed and a general plan of action might be decided upon. Good luck, officers. So we lost some political power. Brazil wins World Cup final. Yeah, whatever. And I want to get to train the troops, so to have this sweet 1,000 manpower, but I can't because I still have something to spend on manpower. Okay, so we have three ways of dealing with the sand. The smart way is, the Zykov one. The easy is the I can't remember his name, Bunyachenko. And the hard way is the Oktan. Okay, so let's go with Zykov because I like this approach. The indefatigable Zykov has used his time at the podium to argue that the best way forward is to go at it smartly and legitimately try to improve the life of our citizens. Legitimacy is derived from the people's support. Our soldiers are brothers, fathers, sons. The men tilling fields and building guns are no less indispensable than the men fighting for a new Russia. Enslaving the whole nation for ulterior purposes was the mistake of the Soviet Union and of the Third Reich. And now the first is dead and the second finds itself dying. It might not be the easiest path. Fear, suspicion and betrayed hope motivate many of our citizens' distrust. Some may never forgive us for working with the Germans. We will have to go the extra mile to prove our good intents. But this problem must be solved now, lest our reputation for tyranny spread to newly liberated provinces. Gaining intel. The men of the village sat in the church wearing their best set of clothes. Chairs had been gathered in a rough circle, centered on the strange men from Samara. Leaning against the wall were an array of soldiers, their weapons dangling casually from the rifle slings. Friends, you've been called to this meeting to help assist the army of Russian liberation. It has always been our hope to bring freedom and democracy to the land we manage. Today we'd like to hear from you and your kin. What are some issues Fuck. My tongue just won't let me speak. What are some issues you'd like to see addressed? How could things be better? An embarrassed silence. Someone raised his hand halfway before reconsidering. Not fast enough for the indefatigable friend of the people. Zykov pointed to the man. You, my friend, you have something on your mind. It's just, sir, the soldiers come around for taxes, but it's never the same amount. I thought that we'd like to know in advance how much they need. Zykov nodded at this. Encouraged, a few others brought up complaints, always respectfully to the soldiers of the room. Yeah, well, because if they weren't respectful, then something would happen. Little by little, a picture emerged of the problems affecting this village out here in the middle of nowhere. The Airways chief propagandist would put this information to good use, and hoped that the villagers would remember their benefactor. A man of the people, Milet Zykov. Okay, so we have a change in popularity of the authoritarian democracy, so we are good to go, I think. So let's get hearing the people out. Our community outreach has gotten some results, despite the cynicism of most of the officer staff. Soldiers have begun to renovate roads into rural communities and helping to clear rubble. Peasants have at first been reluctant to bother the soldiers, but a few have since come out to request help on other tasks. The soldiers have obliged to the most pressing ones, and as a result, quite a bit of goodwill has emerged. Parallel to this, a series of mixed civilian-military tribunals have been established. People wronged by our soldiers or government are encouraged to register their complaints with the judges. While it is out of the question to punish too harshly our soldiers, lest we lose control of the state, ensuring that the worst excesses are penalized and that aggrieved citizens are compensated goes a long way. Another idea that is slowly shaping up are mixed military-civilian community councils, where small garrisons see their organization enmeshed with the village they protect. It will be a long process, but getting the people to support our cause has good chances of actually happening. So we'll get the village councils for 540 days, and this will increase civilian morale by a medium amount. So let's get this. We have another ultimatum from Gorky. Well, we will pay. We have no means to fight them, actually. The community's new joint civilian and military tribunal stood idle for quite a few days. The villagers did not trust the Airways goons to hand out a fair judgment. Even the presence of trusted men such as the village's priest did not inspire much confidence. Eventually, a first test of the new legal structure presented itself. A young man had allegedly been found rummaging through a neighbor's pantry and had taken a bullet in the back for his trouble. The youth had survived, and his family were now accusing their neighbors of attempted murder. The accused had asked the tribunal's help, as few believed his side of the story. Better risk the military's justice than the wait out lynching attempts. The military officer, acting as judge, did a commendable job of patiently taking on both sides of the story. The jury of 4 soldiers and 5 civilians then adjusted for deliberations. A non-guilty verdict for the accused was reached. The judge then imposed on the man a few weeks of community service as well as a fine meant to pay for the care of the injured youth. All across Samara, a range of issues began having their day their day in court. From criminal cases to perfectly mundane administrative topics, agreements and rulings were handed out. Grudgingly, the civilians came to trust the military's willingness to collaborate with them for the sake of law and order. A place to judge every deed. So let's get to our loyalty. We need to end this. We need to end this so to have some better stuff. A coherent domestic policy has been chosen, as has a method of obtaining new equipment for our men. Now the biggest hurdle remaining for us remains the leadership question. To some, Vlasov is a great leader, simply buried by the weight of years. For others, Vlasov is a temporary solution until the Army of National Liberation can choose its true goal and methodology. Finally, for a loud minority, Vlasov is a weak failure that is the main reason that KONR has been rotting in Samara for an entire last decade. A final leadership conference then, to determine where the loyalty of our men fall, and to finally choose what vision of Russia the KONR is fighting for. So let's see what's next. To the people, to the committee, or to the Reich. So probably, depending on my choice, one of them will be chosen or something like that, or maybe not. We'll see. In the halls of power, it had been a welcome relief to leave the frontiers for an extended trip to Samara. Vlasov was used to permissions being granted in muddy shitholes with terrible alcohol and even worse brothels. His presence in Samara, however, would not be so for the R&R. I had to see if this is the event that was triggered by finished focus. With rumbles of a new set of wars in Western Russia, almost every officer that could make the trip had been invited to give their say in a final leadership conference. The officers' committee claimed every officer's opinion would be taken into account. The officers' committee claimed a lot of things. The most pressing topic was on everybody's lips: who would succeed Vlasov as a chairman? Balashov really did not care. He suspected few others did. Far from the little games played in Samara, the vast majority of the ROA spent most of its time patrolling, training, and keeping an eye out for the locals. None of them knew what the future would bring. Making such plans was the hobby of Samara's elite clique. Balashov had been 22 when the Germans drafted him, 25 when they had forced him at gunpoint to leave his fiancée and fight the communists. He was now 33. He had no idea what had become of his fiancée, his children. He had long since given up on returning home. Perhaps the candidates to succeed Vlasov might convince him to keep hope again. Most likely not. Okay, so let's see. We have 3 loyalties. Let's see the loyalty to the people. What is the KONR if not means to an end? We fight for the glorious liberation of Russia. What are the Germans if not dangerous tools at best? Cruel jailers at all times. We fight for a new free Russia. One not enchained by the Bolsheviks nor slaves to the clawed German eagle. Our legitimacy comes from the strength of our army, and the strength of our support by the population. With just and wise men at their head, the Russian people shall rise to a new heights of glory. Zykov and his faction know that they are the best possible successors to Vlasov. The old general has fought to free Russia, and Zykov will see to it that the nation rise from its ashes. And I can now train my troops, so let's do it. Chasing the setting sun. The day's conferences had ended. Balashov and a few other officers from his district had settled on a local bar to get refreshments after a day of thinking. Of talking. Well, thinking and talking. Like most of the city of Samara for the Congress, the establishment was filled to the brim with men of the ROA. In one corner, Balashov recognized one of the Zykovi democracy proponents that had given an impassioned speech. The speaker waved Balashov and his friends over, offering them seats next to his own group of officers. Without much thought, Balashov headed towards the chair, signaling to the barman for a drink. Why not spend the evening with the Zykovics? Why not? In person, the pro-democracy speaker was much more personable than Balashov had expected. A colonel from the border region with the Orenburg communes, the man was an old hand of the West Russian War. Conversations drifted from the topic to topic, memories of the desperate struggle against WRRF, the famous operation to secure the southeastern territories from bandits in the aftermath of the front's collapse. If the colonel's assignment was in the quiet southeast sector, it was because he had helped make it quiet. So, what's an old hand like you doing with Zykov and his jumped-up peasants turned junior officer? Don't you have better things to do than help that fool? One of the Balashov's comrades asked, his tongue loosened by a drink. The colonel's drinking friends flashed grimaces, but the colonel himself shrugged. When we crushed the bandits, the locals in the southeast were grateful. After decades of pointless struggle in the Red Army, then the ROA, it felt nice, you know? Fighting for something. Zykov's strange man, but he is one with the plan, like me. He dreams of going west. Freeing Moscovian. I don't know if my hometown will ever welcome me back, but I can get buried next to my ancestors. That's one thing the Germans won't have taken from me. The colonel finished his drink. Perhaps the ROA too will set in the west, changing the popularity of them 5%. Our loyalty to the committee. The KONR and its leading officers fought hard to break the communist menace. Our men bravely led the spear into the heart of the resurgent Soviet Union. Have the people been grateful to us for saving them of renewed Bolshevism? Not for an instant. Have the Germans done anything but throw us a bone before kicking us back into the kennel? In their arrogance, they call us subhumans one moment before begging us to guard their borders the next. These are hard times in Russia, and they call for hard men. The Russian Army of National Liberation will lead Russia to its renewal. Those strong enough to follow us as soldiers and generals will gladly be accepted. The others are not worth the dirt they stand on. Our leader Vlasov can have no other successor than Bunyachenko. Okay, so Burgundy went full sicko mode. A kindred spirit. In theory, the day's topic was merely about the best way to administer newly liberated areas. A young captain had made a passionate speech about collaboration and partnership with the local civilians. The next officer to speak was Commander Bunyachenko, the usual mouthpiece of the upper echelon of the officers' committee. Balashov was less interested in Bunyachenko's speech than in the man himself. After all, the general's arguments were the usual rhetoric about the dangers of giving too much power to the masses. It was a fine refutation delivered with the general's hint on Ukrainian It was a fine refutation delivered with the general's hint of an Ukrainian accent. No, Balashov was more interested in the officers' committee mouthpiece than in his message. Bunyachenko's grim expression reminded Balashov of his men's. An unhappy determination, a decade of sorrows and losses. The only time the general's eyes lit up was when he mentioned the hated communists and Germans that had stolen their future. Commander Bunyachenko was a hard man and one whom Balashov would gladly follow in battle. The only mystery left unresolved is Balashov's mind about Bunyachenko's dreams. Would such a man remain the officers' committee puppet like Vlasov had become? Or would he use his status as chairman to be something more? Perhaps there is still some life in him. Okay, so our loyalty to the Reich. Woe to the conquered. Twice now the Russian people have weakly clung to their Bolshevik masters, losing both time to the German war machine. The KONR fought bravely in the West Russian War and was instrumental in breaking the morale of the cowardly communist hordes. Now, beyond our border, the leftists plot. In this, they are joined by democratic rabble and the Tsarist relics. Russia has received nothing from this failed regime, but tears, blood, and ash. It is indeed the time for strong men, and the Germans are strong. We must aid them in their quests to bring forth a new era. The foreign Judeo-Bolsheviks and their traitorous accomplices will hang, and from their bodies a new state will be built. Oktan and his associates will enact the future. I miss that. The other road. Vlasov hitched a ride on a troop truck back home with fellow officers. A few discussed the leadership conferences. Most of the others discussed their most recent acquisition from the capital. Booze, tobacco, a few odds and ends. One of the lieutenants showed off his new toy, a sleek Walter PPK pistol to replace his aging P.38 pistol he had been given upon recruitment into the ROA. Many of the men in the truck had a significantly better haul than their meager salary should have allowed. Vlasov thought of the friendly officers in the capitals, associate of Commander Oktan. The trade with the Moscovian was an entire organization of its own, and its members were some of the richest and most generous of the ROA. At the leadership conference, they too had argued for their boss as successor to Vlasov. They railed against Zykov's foolish idealism and against Bunyachenko's lethargic puppeteers in the officers' committee. The ROA was strong. Should it not have a strong leader? One able to provide for the soldiers and officers? One able to enforce discipline, order, and progress throughout Russia? At least so. Oktan's proxies had talked during the conference. They had talked and they had given out much goodies. It paid to be friendly with the men that held so many contacts. Vlasov had not taken anything from these men yet, but the option remained in his mind. They can ease the pain. So, who shall stand beside Vlasov? The factions have made their cases. For some, this was accomplished through speeches to the assembled officers and soldiers. For others, it was through demonstrations and practical work. Three visions of our missions have made their case and argued for their methods. It is now the time to decide who shall stand beside Vlasov and earn a place in history as successor to the future liberator of all Russian people. Vlasov's secret speech. Today, Andrei Vlasov has reluctantly made what will become known as Vlasov's secret speech to his most senior and long-standing officers of the ROA, announcing his successor. It's been a well-known but unspoken fact that the aging chairman has not been in good temperament recently, and many have long expected this day to come. One of Vlasov's aides attended him as he prepared his final speech to be used in announcing the chairman's successor within the hour. Truthfully, he was expected by the officer committee 15 minutes ago for a standard meeting before the announcement, but he hadn't bothered attending. The aide, one of the few allowed into the chairman's room, silently observed the old marshal. His brow was furrowed, and despite the rather chilly temperature of the office, it seemed that his face glistened with sweat. He was intensely staring at his speech, scribbled by hand onto a piece of paper, not reading it or editing it, just staring. The aide checked his watch. "Sir, he tried to hurry the marshal along, well familiar with the punishment he may receive for Vlasov's being late. However, Vlasov put up a hand as soon as the aide spoke, silently terminating the aide's hope to get things moving. However, the marshal stood up, slowly and delicately folded the piece of paper up into his pocket. "Shall we?" he asked the aide. "Yes, sir," the aide responded. The old marshal stood in front of his officers, some of them having been with him since the earliest days of the ROA. He looked at all of them, seeing familiar faces, but for the first time, more than a few faces that he didn't recognize. Could they be new? Vlasov asked himself, the silence in the room deadening as all looked to him. Or had he simply forgotten who they were? Sighing, Vlasov looked down at his paper and spoke. "As you all know, I am not getting any younger. It has time for me to announce a formal successor to the Russian Liberation Army's chairman position. And for this, I have chosen Zykov for his propaganda. Changes the national focus tree to Sam Economic and 3, Zykov 3. Remove Mikhail Beandrov. I have no idea who this is. Aha, so he was the head of government. Oh, we have actually some colorful ministers. Gains Mileti Zykov, which grants head of government authoritarian democracy, political protege, daily political power 10, plus 0.10, consumer goods factor is 5%, 7%. Get 7, the democratic successor. The democratic successor. Mileti Alexandrovich Zykov. The name bounced around the aide's head. Vlasov had been long silent about a potential political successor for him in the case of his death or incapacitation. However, it was obvious to everyone who was anyone in the ROA that the chairman wasn't getting any younger. But Zykov? Certainly an unorthodox choice. Vlasov had convened an emergency meeting for all his aides, nearly half an hour to make a preliminary announcement to them. But the announcement had turned into a discussion. The move was shocking to a number of the more conservative aides who thought that the transition to Zykov would be a disaster. Truthfully, Vlasov was an alright boss. An aide never had to fear reprisals for small mistakes like they did under many other senior officers. All were free to express their opinions there as long as they were respectful. Bunyachenko, one of the aide's peers, voiced his. Zykov's gone as far as proposing the reinstitution of democracy, but the people know nothing of democracy. Most don't care. Will they even understand what that would mean? I worry that all we have worked to build will devolve into the chaos we've been heard is going on in Syktyvkar. The field marshal retorted in a tired but firm tone. Zykov may want democracy, Bunyachenko, but have we not been working towards a free Russia? What Russia is free but does not allow the people freedom. There was silence for a bit. Another aide, one of Bunyachenko's good friends, finally spoke up. But, and if I may, there are some doubts that some of the staff have about Zykov's true intentions, even if he were to assume power after you. The aides seemed to stumble. Some worried that he doesn't even believe in democracy but will attempt to use it as a personal power tool. Vlasov grimaced briefly. It was clear that it had been a thought that had crossed his mind. His true intentions may be ambiguous. That may be true, but it never leaves this room. Even if he was not to restore democracy, I believe in his ability to restore hope. And right now, that's what we need most. We need to give the Russian people hope. There was a pause. Vlasov was far from a talented orator, but all were aware of the poor opinion of their organization with most of the subjects they ruled. Zykov had always been a propagandist. Dismissed. Vlasov barked. Back to work. Okay, so let's see what actually Zykov has on his mind. So we have some war focuses. Actually, this is not half bad. We'll be able to make use of corruption. Maybe we will be able to expand somewhat the smuggling operations, because excising the rot will decrease corruption. Okay, so Gundam the Gorky. It's a long, very long focus tree, as you can see. But I think that it will be fun. And there is rebuilding Samara. We won't be able to get the voice of reason before economic readiness. It looks fun, but I think that we will end this episode now. I hope that you've liked it, and feel free to comment, to like this video, and to subscribe if you want to see some more. And I will see you in the next one. See ya!